Welcome everyone to this webinar on starting and growing as a business analyst with Laura Brandenburg. We're going to be starting in 2 minutes, just waiting for other people to join. And when it's 10 o'clock, which is in 2 minutes time, we will start. Can you see my screen, Laura?
Yes, I can. I can see your video too.
Oh, no, you shouldn't see my
There we go.
Okay, you
I
shouldn't
was
see
like, oh no, are we expecting to do screen shares?
my
Really have a Saturday here.
Yeah, you shouldn't see my video. Okay, now we can start. All right, thank you very much, everyone, for joining this webinar on starting and growing as a business analyst with Laura Brandenburg. My name is Bola Deshope, and I'll be the host. And so I'm going to spend the first 3 to 4 minutes explaining what helping other people succeed is, literally just running you through what our profile is, and after which I'll give the presentation to Laura. So I'm going to cover who we are, our core team, what we do, our key achievements, and maybe testimonials if we've got the time. So first of all, we're a social enterprise. What that means is we're not for profit. We're a not-profit making organization, and our focus is on human capital development or career development. And we focus on two areas: career growth and career stability. So what we do is literally provide a springboard for professionals to grow in their career or to achieve some bit of stability in their career. And we've been able to create a vision for ourselves and a mission that we're following. So our vision is to be one of the top career development enterprise for professionals in North America first, and then the rest of the world, because we've had to engage people from all over the world. Then our mission is to improve the competence and the confidence of professionals through rich coaching, mentoring, training, and development support. This enterprise was founded by myself, Bola Deshope, and my very good friend, Taiwo Abraham. We've been doing a lot of coaching and a lot of mentoring for young professionals, but we realized that we needed to sort of stabilize this and make it a bit more formal. So we founded helping other people succeed. And then because of the interest and the engagement that we've been getting, we realized that we won't be able to do it alone. So we brought in a network of mentors and coaches scattered all over the country, all over the world, in the UK, in the US, in Canada, Nigeria, South Africa. And these are the guys that help us to help other people to succeed in their career. And they're doing this for free. These guys have a great understanding of their career. They understand the art of mentoring and coaching, and they have passion for helping other people. These are the things that we do. We do coaching, mentoring, mock interviews, webinars, online info sessions, resume development, mock interviews, subsidized training, and a host of other things. Our major area of focus for now is business analysis, project management, change management, agile and scrum, business intelligence and data analytics, and we're going into entrepreneurship. So everybody trying to get into business analysis, project management, change management, agile, business intelligence will find our enterprise the go-to place. Our key achievements, before this one, we've had 312 people attend our webinars. We've had 34 coaching programs. We've mentored over 180 people. We're working with about 19 mentors and coaches all around the world. And we have presence in 7 countries: Canada, the US, the UK, India, Nigeria, South Africa, Morocco. And we're going into other countries. So that will be my presentation. I will now hand over to Laura. Laura, I'm sure you're ready for this guy. So Laura, you have the floor, you have the screen, you have control of everything. Please start when you're ready.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. Let me make sure I'm sharing my right screen. And if you can just let me know if you can see my slides and hear me okay, just to make sure there's no challenges there.
Right. So I can hear you. I can
You
hear
can hear
you.
and see my slide? Perfect. All right. Awesome,
Right.
awesome. Well, thank you, Bola, for having me here today. Thank you for everyone for attending. I got to learn a little bit more about hops. You should share some when we spoke, but I didn't realize the breadth and the depth of what you're doing. It's just an awesome concept, and I'm proud to be able to support it in a bit today.
Thank you.
So, yeah, and thank you for having me here. And thank you all for being here too. One of our mantras, or my mantras, is that we build our profession one business analyst at a time. And that means success starts with you, and the work that people like Bola and all the mentors that he's brought together are all contributing to that, as well as the work that you're doing to invest in yourself. For me, it's a Saturday morning. For you, it might be, I think, more late afternoon or evening, depending on where you're at. So taking your personal time to invest in yourself in something like this is a big contribution as well. And my real belief is that business analysts make the world a better place. And that lasting change comes from grassroots efforts. So when we are each individually improving ourselves and helping each other improve, we're all contributing to the ongoing evolution and expansion of the world and making that world a better place. So thank you for being here, and thank you again, Bola, for having me here today.
Thank you, Stu.
Yeah, so what we're going to cover, these were the questions that when we talked a few weeks ago about hosting this, that Bola thought would best serve the group the questions that people had seemed to have. So we're going to talk about, what do business analysts do and what value do they create? And then we'll talk about how to successfully get into a business analyst career. And then finally, we will talk about as well, he thought there might be some interest in the programs that we offer at Bridging the Gap. So I'll share a little bit about our programs and how they can help you take your career to the next level or get into a business analyst career if that's what you're looking for. And throughout, we're going to pause at a few different places for questions and interaction so that I can make sure that this is really landing with you. And I like to receive kind of an indication of where you're at and what questions you have as we go, as opposed to saving everything for the end. So feel free to put those into the chat box, and then Bola will bring them up as the time allows.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. I'm just going to kind of minimize my GoToMeeting because Usually it's not distracting for me, but for some, all right, there we go. So just a little bit about me, because I know probably many of you are new to me. I won't like go on forever about my background, but I do have about 15 years of background in the business analysis and technology space. Bridging the Gap was founded back in 2008, so we just celebrated our 10-year anniversary. And before that time, I was a director level manager. I had a team of business analysts, project managers, and quality assurance professionals. There's 15 people on the team. We built it from the ground up. When I was hired into that organization, I was the first business analyst, and then we expanded and exploded into that 15-person team. I've also been a consultant, a contractor, and then prior to that, I was a full-time business analyst. So I've seen this profession from many different angles, and I try to bring all of that into the advice and the coaching that I do. I'm also the author of How to Start a Business Analyst Career. This book has been in publication in some form for, I think, 9 years now, and it's in its second edition. And so that is a resource that a lot of people find valuable in terms of how to get in and get started. And then Bridging the Gap is both an online resource. We have over 500 blog articles online that help people with specific aspects of their career. And we also are an online training company where we provide training and mentoring and next level skill development for business analysts in the profession. So just a little bit about my path into business analysis, because I know many of you are looking to make the jump from a different career into business analysis. And where I really start this story is I was just out of college. I had a degree in philosophy and English. A lot of people think, oh, you must have like a computer science degree or a business MBA or something. I don't have any of those things. I was a philosophy and English major, and I scored what really on the outside looked at like a jackpot job. I was an editorial assistant at a publishing company. I was working on books. For somebody who majored in English in the US, like working on books, like that should have been the jackpot, right? It should have been like it was like the best that I could even hope for at that time. And it was a good, stable job. It was not incredibly high paying job, but it was a stable job that got me into the profession, or professionally working in a big organization with lots of opportunities, but it was incredibly boring. I was bored out of my mind. It was really a lot of data entry. I wasn't even like editing the books. I was sort of double checking other people's proofreading that they'd done of the books, right? It was a lot of compiling and organizational and administrative type of work, not really like exciting content development type of work. And so I was really frustrated and I felt really stuck. And what happened from that moment though is like there was this call that everybody's like, oh, all the good people, they go to technology, right? Like they don't stay in editorial for long, they end up in technology. And I was just sort of like, gosh, I wonder what that would be like. I really didn't have much exposure to what that would mean, but I just started to be like, I want to be on a technology project. And I kept asking and asking and asking until finally they put me on a technology project. And I was assisting one of the senior editors on that project. And even in that role, it was sort of like, well, we don't volunteer to do that. We don't want to help too much, because once you start helping, they kind of like take you over, and like we've got to stay in our lane of our print books, right? Not on the online technology projects. And I was sort of like, well, I want to do this, right? And I want to do more. And that senior editor went on a 3-week vacation, and I just started volunteering to do things like anything I could do. And what that led to was actually an opportunity to join the quality assurance team. It was like a month later, because I had demonstrated how I could work and contribute on that technology project. And then as I got into quality assurance and I was doing testing, I was asking so many questions about the requirements that they they offered me an opportunity to be writing the requirements, right? I was actually asked to apply for a position on the business analyst team. And I used to think that that was all just sort of luck and me being in the right place at the right time. But what I want to share with you today is some strategies that you can actually use. This will come more in the how do I get into BA piece, but some strategies that you can use to actually make this happen in your own career, because I've seen it happen for other people, and the path is always a little bit different, right? It's not the exact steps I took, but it's the similar, but it is the reaching out, the volunteering to do things that are uncomfortable, the creating opportunities and starting to act as a BA even before you're in the role that tends to create the opportunities to move into a business analyst role. So that I wanted to share my story because it's part of everything we'll talk about today, and I've seen it happen for other people as well. Okay, so what is a business analyst? This is the manifesto of how we at Bridging the Gap really think about what business analysts do. And it's out of chaos, we create order. Out of disagreement, we create alignment. Out of ambiguity, we create clarity. But most of all, we create positive change for the organizations we serve. And so for most people who want to get into business analysis, like there is something in here that fuels you, this idea of creating positive change, this idea of being part of the solution, right? Taking the chaos of our projects and putting some order around it, taking the disagreement between stakeholders and finding the common threads and creating alignment, taking the ambiguity and the uncertainty that people feel about a project and moving it towards clarity. Right? And you can be doing this now in your own work, regardless of whether you have the business analyst title. And you can be, and if you are in a business analyst role, this is often, your touchstone for what success looks like. So how does the IIBA define business analysis? So the IIBA is the International Institute of Business Analysis, and they are the leading nonprofit in business analysis specifically, kind of all things business analysis. And in the guide to the business analysis body of knowledge, that's a mouthful, it's called the BABAC, we have that business analysis is the practice of enabling change in an enterprise by defining needs and recommending solutions that deliver value to stakeholders. So really that enabling change, creating positive change, very similar language there. Defining needs, right? What do we really need? What's the problem we're solving here? What's the solution? And often business analyst roles are involved in some sort of technology solution, but it does not have to be a technology solution. Most of the roles out there today do have some sort of a technical component, and we're going to talk about what skills that you need to be successful in that component. But it can be solutions that are just changes to the business process. Or sometimes it's like hiring a new person. Sometimes it's how we structure our organization. So those solutions do not have to be technology specific, but they do have to deliver value to some sort of stakeholder and to our organization as a whole. And that's what we do as business analysts. Okay. So what does this look like? Like, let's break this down, because I feel like both the manifesto and the IIBA's definition can still feel a little bit like hard to grasp onto, right? It's like, it's a good touchstone, gives us a lot of ideas about what it might look like, but what does it actually look like when we're showing up in a project? So this is the 8-step business analysis framework that we teach at Bridging the Gap. And it's the framework for how do you approach a business analyst role on a project. So it is in the context of a project, and most often there's some pieces of it that, like, there's a software solution or partially a software solution as part of that project, right? So we're going to walk through each of these steps. And there is on the Bridging the Gap website a free training that goes deeper into this. So if you do want to go deeper into the 8-step process framework, definitely check out that free training as well. If you just go to Bridging the Gap and click free course, it's there. But we're gonna go through this in some detail today as well. So it starts with getting oriented. And this is really important because so often what I see business analysts do is they make assumptions about what their role should be. and they make assumptions about where they should start, and they try to like jump in to the middle, right? And I've done this myself too, especially when I was first going from like my first role to my second role to my third role. I kind of assumed that that next role would be exactly like the role before. But really each role, each project, each opportunity we have, it's a little bit different. And so we need to understand, what does success look like for us in this role? Who are the stakeholders involved in this project? What's been done on this project before? A lot of times we're not starting a project from scratch. So often we're like picking up a project that somebody worked on a year ago and then it got side tabled for some reason, right? And so you want to understand the bigger context of the project. You want to understand the bigger context of the role, especially when you're getting hired into a new position. Like, why am I here? What's the expectations of how we're doing business analysis in this organization? Or if there is nothing, what are the tools that I can bring, and what are the measures of success here? And then the second thing you do is really discover the primary business objectives. So this is the business need, this is the positive change, the value that we're looking to generate from this project. So why does this project exist, right? Why are we funding this? What does success look like for the project? Super, super important to figure out at the very beginning. And from there, we go into more of a definition of scope. And here, what we're really talking about is the solution scope. So what does the solution look like? Not yet in the detail. We're going to get into the detailed requirements in step 5, but like the main pieces and parts. Are we buying a new system? Are we custom coding a solution? What are the key features of that solution? What are the key business processes we're updating? How does this all fit together? Do we need to integrate two systems together? What, at a very high level, does that look like? And this allows everybody on the team to start to see what their role is in the solution, starts to put a more meaningful budget and timeline together versus that sounds like a 3-month project, right? There's I need to build these pieces and parts, and I can start to break down what that looks like. And then we need to come up with a plan. What are the requirements, deliverables that we need to create to fully flesh out the details in that scope? So if we're in an agile environment, this could be our product backlog and our user stories, right? If we are in a more traditional or iterative environment, it could be our list of use cases. It could be our list of business processes. If we're not defining a software solution. And even if we do have a software solution, we probably still need to do the business processes as well. I'm going to talk about some of the techniques we use in the next slide. And then we go into those detailed requirements. And so often we're pressured to start here, right? So if you're thinking about how can I grow, often like making sure you're starting at step 1 and not in kind of relieving the pressure to start at step 5 is a great place to grow. But this is where we're actually figuring out all the details, engaging with stakeholders, figuring out what do we want on this screen, how is this little piece going to work, right? So the very detailed level that allows the solution team to actually build that solution. And then from there, we're not done. Sometimes in some organizations, it's like, okay, great, you've defined the requirements, you're on to the next project. But in an ideal world, we're still in a very collaborative, supportive role throughout the project. So as the technical team is building and designing that solution, we're reviewing documentation or being part of design meetings, making sure that that true business problem that we're solving is getting seen through all the way to the solution design and implementation. And then we're also engaging with the business to make sure that they're ready to embrace that solution and update their business processes and update their work aids and templates if they need to make sure that they can leverage that solution to achieve that business objective. And then at the end, assessing what value did we actually create here? Right? How do we create a positive change? How can we celebrate that win? What updates do we need to make to our project and to the process? And often we find new projects and we start the process over again. Okay. So that's kind of what to expect when you're actually on a business analyst project as a business analyst. What do you actually do? What are some of the techniques that you use? and what are the deliverables and techniques within this process? So that's what this slide is about. And this is the business analyst blueprint, and it's a collection of business analysis techniques that are most common for entry to mid-level business analyst roles. And I did see there was a question about the ECBA. So like the requirements for the ECBA plus, there's a strong overlap between what the IIBA has said are the core skills and what we have as the core skills here in the blueprint. I think we have 12, they had 12, and like there was just 2 that were different, and I think we covered 2 of those in the BA framework, and then the rest are these techniques. So a lot of overlap there in terms of what IIBA has also defined as the core skills for a new to mid-level business analyst. So we divide these into 3 levels, being the business level, software level, information level. I'm going to talk each about that, and then into analysis and communication. So why do we do that? Analysis and communication is really important because everything I just talked about in the last slide, like we don't do that in a vacuum. Our stakeholders are part of everything we do. We discover information, validate information. We're constantly communicating with stakeholders throughout that process, right? It's not like we have to figure that all out and we do it in a vacuum. There's a lot of communication involved. So the analysis techniques are, how do we structure our thinking? How do we analyze the requirements? What does our output or deliverable look like? And it tends to be the most visible aspect of business analysis and the techniques that we might see in a job requirement, right? So, but it never happens in a vacuum. We always need to be communicating to discover and validate that information as well. And so that's why we divide between analysis and communication. And then business, software, and information levels. So one view, like no one view of the requirements is going to give you a complete picture. If you're just looking at what the software needs to do, you're going to miss how the business is using that software. And if you're just looking at like how the data is organized or how the information is organized, you might miss what the software actually needs to do with that data. And so by taking these different perspectives, this is how you avoid missing requirements, which is always a big thing, right? How do we avoid missing requirements on a project? One of the key ways, there's 2 really key pieces, and one is communicating with stakeholders, right? And making sure we're actually eliciting and sharing and discovering the real information from them. And then the second is using different tools to look at the requirements from different perspectives. And then I would say the third is actually using these structured techniques to organize our thinking, because when you use the techniques in the right way, you will actually find missing pieces logically. I told you I was a philosophy major. There's a logical component to how these techniques work that help you actually discover the questions to ask and the missing gaps so that you can ask those questions and get that stakeholder input. So the business level, I just want to talk about each of these levels real quickly. So the business level is, how does the business flow? What is the business process? That could be a manual process. It could be on a spreadsheet. It could be using an information technology tool. And we look at that both visually in terms of a process flow diagram or a workflow diagram, and textually in terms of a more detailed textual model. And if you haven't used a textual model to analyze your business process, most often, like, you might be missing some of the nuances of it. Because it's really easy, like visual models are great because stakeholders really can see them quickly and you get a lot of feedback and interaction on that. But that textual model helps you take it to the next level and get really clear with your language, and often uncovers gaps that you don't see when you're thinking mostly in that visual diagram. The software level is the functional level of what does the software do, not the level of how does the software work or how does it build, right? So it's not how do I code software. I get a lot of questions of like, do I have to be a technology background? Do I have to know how to code to be a business analyst? It's like, what does the software do? What is visible to the end user? And you do have to be pretty nuanced and detailed about this when you are working on a software project. And you do have to get pretty specific with the details in your use cases or that flow into your user stories on an agile environment. But you don't have to know, is it C+ code or what kind of code it is underneath and how that's being written. But you do have to analytically think through how it's going to work and what the user system interaction is. And then finally, we have the information level, and this is really how is data stored in your organization, and how does that information support the software, and how does that information support the business process? And there's many techniques here that really help you communicate more clearly, help you discover the knowledge and the terminology, especially in new business domains, help you see how different systems need to interact in order to automate or streamline a business process. So when you understand, it's understanding how the data is stored and how the data flows in an organization to support what we've talked about in the business and software level. Okay, so I'm kind of getting close to wrapping up this part. So if you have any questions about what a BA does, we'll be close to taking questions on that, and then we'll talk more about how do you get started. So the other question that I was asked to talk about is how does this create value? Right? So how do we as business analysts actually create value for our organizations? And when I think about the ROI or return on investment for a business analyst, I think about both how do we reduce project costs and increase project benefits. So when you think about everything we just talked about in the process framework, in the blueprint, what you're really trying to do is reduce the cost to scope. So when you had step 2 was discovering the business needs. A lot of times what happens is we try to skip forward in steps, or teams try to skip forward in steps, right? And so we try to come up with a solution to a problem we don't understand, or we try to come up with detailed requirements to a solution we don't understand, right? And then we just end up in this turn of like one requirement leads to another requirement, and then we spend weeks analyzing something and then realize like there was a bigger problem that we could have solved, or this isn't even really the real problem that we're trying to solve here, right? And that's the waste that can happen when we don't use business analysis practices and principles in our work. So business analysts, when they bring this framework and bring these skills to an organization, they really do help reduce scoping costs. It feels like an investment at first. It feels like it's slowing stuff down sometimes, but it really is reducing over the big picture the costs. And it's minimizing rework. So I'm sure we've all been on projects where you have all these detailed requirements and the technology team goes and implements them, and then you discover, oh, that wasn't what we really wanted. Can you change it? And changing it takes just as long, if not longer, than the original implementation, right? And so the actual implementation scope has expanded because we didn't really understand what problem we were solving from the beginning. So this is another way we help minimize that rework by ensuring those requirements represent the business needs and are solving the real problem. And then often when we start with that business process and don't jump right into what does the software need to do, we might find a more cost-effective solution. We might find we have software that exists in our organization today, or a configuration that can be made that solves that problem really easily versus needing to invest months building something new or customizing something or buying a new tool, right? Sometimes we can actually just find a really simple, elegant, easy, quick win to some of the bigger problems that we have. And then we can also increase benefits. So we are discovering new needs. What is the real true need here? And it might be different than what's originally expressed to us when we drill into what's the real problem that we need to solve. We can discover the true need that's really going to create that bigger positive change in an organization. In that process of scoping and identification of needs, we're helping prioritize, which means it's not just that we're doing everything. What's the most valuable part of the process? What's the most valuable part of the project? And that can help us make sure that we're implementing the pieces that really have the most benefit. And how do we leverage new solutions? So this is becoming more and more significant because so often today we're not building custom code like we did 10, 20 years ago. That was the default solution 10, 20 years ago. More the default now is that we are buying, licensing commercial off-the-shelf systems, right? And so we have usually we have functionality available to us through that solution that the business might not even be aware of how that could help them. And so when we understand those solutions and understand the business process and kind of see the problems and the opportunities, we can often suggest like, hey, there's this piece that we could use for this problem in our business. You know, we already have, the solution is here, right? And we can elevate the awareness of that and increase the benefits of our projects. So that's just some of the ways that I feel like business analysis creates value in our organizations and some of the things you can be talking about as you start to think about what's next in your career as well. And then to close this section, I'll just leave you with one of my favorite quotes, which is, I believe on every successful project, you will find a business analyst. They might not have the title, but there will be somebody doing everything we just talked about. Sometimes it's like the technical lead, sometimes it's the project manager, sometimes it's the business sponsor, sometimes it's just a subject matter expert that gets thrown into the role, right? But you'll find somebody helping facilitate the communication and in some way analyzing the requirements. And it might have looked more informal than you see informal business analyst practices, but they are in some way leading the team through this process. Okay, so with that, I just pause for a moment and see where we're at and answer questions.
Okay, so guys, thanks a lot, Laura. If you've got any question on what business analysts do and the values that they bring or add to organizations, please just use the question box to type in your question, and I'll read them out and Laura will answer. And by the way, I forgot to say this, Laura has spoken at probably the biggest business analysis events all over the world. She speaks, she trains, she mentors, she coaches on business analysis. She's the author of the bestseller, How to Get into Business Analysis or How to Start Your Career as a Business Analyst. So I'm sure she will be able to answer all your questions. So there's a question here. I'm not sure if this question is for this section or the other. So the guy says he's got 6 years banking experience and he's trying to get into business analysis. He's preparing for the ECBA certification, but just wants to know how to best transition smoothly into business analysis from the banking space.
That is a perfect question, and we're going to kind of go in detail in the next section. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So there's another question from someone. Just give me a minute. Okay. So this case says, what would be your advice for an entirely new BA, zero experience, currently not working, and trying to get into a different role and volunteer for BA functions before moving up to a BA role?
Entirely new. Yeah, definitely to start with, we are going to talk a little bit about this next too, but starting with where, like, sometimes when you have zero experience, entirely new BA, and are out of work, like solving all those problems at once can be a challenge, right? So we're going to talk about, do you actually have transferable skills that you can bring forward with you, and then we'll also talk about, if not, what does your ideal transitional role look like that you can then leverage into business analysis. So yeah, should we move on to the next one? It seems like all the questions are about, like, how do I get into a business analyst role? So maybe we should just speak through that content and then take questions on that.
Right. So there's a question that I think we might be able to answer.
Yeah.
I say, what's the difference between a BA and a PM?
That's a great one. Yeah, so typically, a business analyst is thinking about what is the problem, what is the solution look like, what are the requirements, right? What is the change that we're making? The project manager is looking at what how do we schedule, budget, sequence this change, and what's the team that we need, what are all the tasks, how do those tasks relate together. So they're guiding the implementation of that solution. And the business analyst is defining what that solution looks like and how it delivers value for the business. That's in the purest definition of the roles. The reality is in many organizations, there's one person filling both of those roles, or the roles are split up a little bit differently. A lot of times the project manager might be doing some of those early steps in the business analysis process that we talked about in terms of defining objectives and scope. So like it depends on how the titles are used in that organization and how the roles are defined. But in the purest sense, the project manager is more responsible for the implementation and the timeline and the budget. It's a good question.
Just one more question or two.
Yeah.
Do I need to be technical to be a business analyst?
It's interesting how that word has been starting to be used. So you don't have to be technical in the sense of knowing how to code or knowing how to put systems together. You do need to be technical in the sense of understanding how systems work and understanding the possibilities of technology. And that's really that software level understanding, the functional level that we talked about in the blueprint slide. So how does this software respond when a user does this? And how does the data flow between systems? Again, not how do I actually build that in SQL, but conceptually, how does the data move from one system to another? And how does that enable the software to do what we need it to do? So you need to be able to get to that like functional technical understanding as part, and you don't have to know it necessarily going in. Sometimes you learn it as you go through the project, but you need to have the skills to analytically think through that. And a lot of times today when people ask, do I need to be technical? They're actually kind of thinking about that level of technical.
Okay, one last question.
Yeah.
What's your take on merging the roles of business analyst and project manager in one function? That's a question from someone.
Oh, yeah. So as I mentioned in the beginning, like we do more grassroots efforts at Bridging the Gap, right? So I always look at those kinds of questions from the perspective of how does it suit the individual, as opposed to like, is this right or wrong for an organization to do that? And there are different perspectives like organizationally, right? So I think it's each individual's decision. What are you best at? There's people I know who are great business analysts and great project managers. Like Paula Bell, who is our program manager of course delivery at Bridging the Gap, she's great at both. Me, when I do some project management in my business by default, but I hired Paula to do more of it because the project management part makes my head hurt, right? Like I can do it, but I'm not great at it. So you really have to look at it for yourself. Like what lights you up? Do you like some of that? Define roles that really suit you, and then look to create that or spearhead that in your organization. And we are seeing a lot more combination of roles and specialization of roles in the BA space, just because organizations want people who can do multiple different things. Yeah. All right, so should we, I know there's a lot of questions, so I will stay on for questions, and we are, just to kind of set the stage, we're probably going to go over the top of the hour, but I do want to make sure we can at least get through a bit of the second part for anybody who does have to leave at the top of the hour.
Okay, I think we can go through the second part and then we'll take questions.
Yeah, and then we'll take more for sure. Okay. So how do you get into a business analyst role? And I love the questions, by the way, so keep them coming. I'm happy to answer as many as we can. So this is the business analyst career roadmap that I created quite a few years ago now. And it really, we're going to walk through it quickly because I think it addresses some of the questions that had come in about where do I go? I have 6 years in banking. Where do I go? Or I have, I forget the other one, but it addresses a lot of that. What do I do to get started? So what we're doing here is like we just explored the profession and confirmed your career choice, right? Like, is business analysis something you really, really want to do? Is it part of your best path? Like, you want to take some time to figure that out. Hopefully what we shared here helps you decide like, yes, I'd love to do this, or no, this is like totally not for me. I'm in the wrong place. And then the big differentiating factor is, are you employed in an office setting? So if you are employed today in an office setting, what the path that we see work is that you get on what we call this virtuous cycle of doing business analysis, and you just start exactly where you're at. And I'm going to share some very specific tasks that you can be doing regardless of your role. Okay, so if you're employed in an office setting, you want to get on this virtuous cycle of doing business analysis in your current role, not waiting for your title to happen or some external change to happen, but here and now. And then you also want to be looking at, what are the internal options? What are the roles like in your company? Are there people doing business analysis now? And remember, on every successful project, you'll find a business analyst. So does your organization have projects? Who is creating who's figuring out the why and the what of that project? Again, they might not have the business analyst job title, but it might be a role for you to think about moving into. So you want to start to seek that role, and use your virtuous cycle to do more and more tasks that will lead you to be qualified for that role. So when I shared about going from QA to BA, I was in requirements meetings, I was asking a lot of questions, I was creating a new test process, right? I was doing things that were actually business analysis tasks in my testing role, and then that is what led to my business analyst role. And then sometimes you need an interim step. So sometimes you're so far away that you want to take a step that's closer to business analysis, so more of a transitional opportunity that ultimately leads you to a business analysis job. Now, what if you're not employed in an office setting? What fits there? You want to explore the options in your local job market. And along this path, and we're going to talk about this, is you want to figure out what are your true transferable skills. So what of everything we talked about, what have you done, even if you didn't have the business analyst job title, right? What are you bringing to the table in true transferable skills? Really like selling yourself and positioning yourself as strongly as possible. And then what kind of role are you qualified for is really what you're looking for there. And could you actually qualify yourself for a business analyst role? We just had somebody who's part of our Blueprint program, 3 weeks into the program, get hired into a business analyst opportunity. And she had the same, like, I hadn't actually done business analysis. I didn't have the title. She'd done it, but it was informal, right? And so she was learning the more formal ways of doing business analysis, not even all of it, because she's only 3 weeks into the program. But, and that allowed her to position that past experience as more transferable. So you also want to kind of think about what tools or training or awareness might you need in order to be able to really truly sell the value of your past experience. And still there, if you're finding some big gaps between your qualifications and a business analyst role, a transitional opportunity often makes a lot of sense. So what kinds of roles are you best qualified for given your skills, your industry experience, your background, that might be easier to get hired into so that you can get up into this part of the flow over here? So you can get employed in an office setting and then start creating that virtuous cycle that will lead to a BA role. So that's the general piece. And then I want to talk about transferable skills, expanding your experience, so getting on this virtuous cycle. And sorry, I have one other thing here. Oh, and then focusing on roles that actually leverage your unique expertise. So we'll talk about each of those pieces of that in a little bit more detail. So transferable skills. Um, these are all different skills that are different backgrounds that people have leveraged to get into business analyst positions. And each background really has benefits and like liabilities, right? So you have things that you're really good at from this background, and you have things that you have to almost practices or habits you have to overcome in order to get into more of a business analyst role. And actually, this slide came from a presentation I did with IIBA years ago, and we went into each one of these in detail. I believe that's part of the public archive of IIBA. So I mean, we don't have time to do that here. We're trying to cover a lot of ground, but I'm going to quickly go through a few of them so that you can kind of see how this works. And if you want more coverage on a role, I would encourage you to check out that webinar we did in the archive for IIBA. So let's just talk about like software developers. So if you do have a technical background, so you have exposure to how requirements work. You might have even communicated with end users about what the requirements do or the software that you've built. And that could be some elicitation or discovery, right? So you're asking questions about the software you're building in order to understand the requirements, right? And to understand the requirements so that you can build the solution that actually meets their needs. So to what extent were you actually part of not just the software development process, but also the requirements analysis process? Often there's some transferable skills there. And then the challenge is getting out of, in order to understand what solution we're building, it has to be software and I have to understand the details, right? And getting more into that business process view and further into what's the true business need and stopping your analytical mind from coming up with the specific technical solution too quickly. So those are some of the things to watch out for if you have more of a technical background. We've also had people from customer service move into business analysis. And customer service, some of the transferable skills are really, really good communication skills. Being able to talk to maybe an unhappy customer and understand their real problem, right? Not all that different from talking to a stakeholder in the business who might be really frustrated with the project, right? And understanding what their real problem is. And often the opportunities here are seeing like, oh, this problem keeps coming up again and again and again. How can we come up with a solution that solves the root cause of this problem instead of addressing it on like a reactionary customer service type basis? And often being a subject matter expert on a project that affects the customer and starting to represent the customer and getting more familiar with the projects. Software tester, that's one I've talked about with my role. Project manager, often doing some business analysis. Technical writer, this one's really interesting because often technical writers are like writing the system documentation after it's been built. But so often, if there's not someone doing business analysis, it's not super clear. So they're actually discovering what was built, how is an end user supposed to use this so that I can write the documentation to help them use it effectively. And that's business process analysis, right? That's functional, that software requirements level that we talked about. And so they might have been using some of those skills in order to create the documentation that they needed to create. And then subject matter expert is kind of a general role, but it's any time that you were an expert on a project, you were an end user and shaping how software was working for you. And you have experience then with the requirements process, you have exposure to the project development lifecycle, and possibly even experience kind of testing and clarifying your needs. Okay, so we really want to look deep at your transferable skills and figure out what do you bring to the table when you are applying for a new position. And the second thing is to look at what roles might leverage your unique expertise, because we have been talking about business analysis more in this generalist view because there are all these core skills that underlie what are required for all business analyst roles. So the framework, the core analytical and communication skills that we talked about with the blueprint slide, right? But what we see in the job market is that there's all these like layers and specializations of business analysis. Rarely do we see just the level of skills that are really the core business analyst skills. So that can be frustrating if you're like, oh my gosh, every BA job is different. How do I possibly qualify for all of these BA jobs, right? Because this one requires SAP and I don't have SAP, and this one requires Salesforce.com, and this one requires insurance, and this one requires Agile. Like there's all these skills across all these positions. You don't need all those positions. You need one. And so the ones that you want to focus on are, where do you have a background and expertise that is going to qualify you? Because especially in these specialist roles, sometimes organizations hire more for the specialization, the specialized skill, than they do for that business analysis competency. So if you have experience in an industry like the banking industry, your best bet is going to be a business analyst role in the banking industry first, right? So leverage that industry experience for roles that are going to value your banking knowledge and allow you to start to do some of those business analysis capabilities. And it might also be that in your banking experience, you have experience with specific tools, meaning business systems that are used in the banking industry. I'm not in-depth familiar with that, but there's probably tools that are used across multiple organizations. And so your expertise in those tools as a functional end user of those tools could also be valuable. And so looking for roles that require that as well. So that's kind of how specialization affects your role. Hybrid roles are also really common, which means you're doing business analysis plus something else, like business analysis and testing, business analysis and project management, business analysis and software development. So if you have an area of expertise or a background in one of those areas, looking for a role that is both could be a good starting point. So you're getting to do more of the business analysis and having an area of strength in project management or testing or software development or whatever that is. Okay. So the other piece I wanted to drill in here is this is that virtuous cycle piece of that career roadmap I showed. And so what can you actually start doing now? And this is assuming that you are in a professional role. If you're not in an office setting or professional role, you can volunteer to do some of these things. And we do have people do this in our programs, particularly with analyzing a process, like volunteering at a local charity or a nonprofit or with a small business your friend owns, right, to help them analyze a process. And you can always find a process to analyze. So again, we had that one example from in the banking industry. What are the business processes that you do in your work in the banking industry, right? You do day to day. Go and learn about process analysis if you don't already. You might already be doing this, but if you don't, then you could figure out your processes and analyze those and start to meet with the people who provide inputs to that process and receive your outputs and look at the process from a slightly different, bigger perspective. And that gets you into this one on the right here of conducting elicitation and facilitating meetings, right? So you're looking at your bigger process, you're discovering information from other end users or stakeholders, you're bringing these BA skills to bear in your current role, and you start to get noticed as a business analyst. A lot of times then you start to make improvements and people are like, I want somebody to help me with that, right? And you start to see these opportunities come to you. As a subject matter expert or a tester, really reviewing specifications, any opportunity you ever have in your organization to shadow a business analyst or just volunteer on a software project. That was a big part of my jump from editorial to QA, was just getting on a project, like getting into that software project setting, created opportunities for me. And then scoping a project or initiative. So if your manager hands you something and says, can you do this? Taking a half hour to write out clearly what you think the scope of that is. And it doesn't have to be a big 50-page document, right? It can be a few paragraphs in an email with a bullet list of what the key elements of the solution are. And when you do that, you are doing steps 2 and 3 of the business analysis process we talked about. So just looking for any pieces or opportunities to start applying business analysis mindset to your work. And if you have any doubts about where to start, you start with this analyzing a business process. So, because I've seen that work, like I specifically could like have dozens of examples, but we've just seen it work so many times, and it's the kickstart that leads to everything else. Okay. So I'm going to just quickly talk about the programs that we offer at Bridging the Gap as well, and then we'll take questions just in case anybody has to go at the top of the hour, and then we'll have this information too, and I'm happy to stay on for additional questions as well. So we have 4 courses at Bridging the Gap. BA Essentials Masterclass, which covers that 8-step framework, and then business process analysis, use cases and wireframes, and data modeling for business analysts that cover each of those requirements levels that we looked at in the blueprint. They are each 12 professional credits. So if you are thinking about certification, 3 of them gets you the 35 you need for like the CBAP, and 2 of them gets you a little bit more than the 21 you would need for like the ECBA. They're all online, all demand, and they're all instructor supported. And Bola twisted my arm a little bit. We don't usually do discounts except for through our kind of like in our internal subscriber base, but we do have a limited time 20% savings through the end of March as a thank you for being on this program. And that code is the HOPS 2019 to use in the shopping cart. So how do they work? Because I think this is a really important part of whether it's our programs or a different provider's program. Like, you want to think about how do you integrate your training into actually receive the value and the benefit and move your career forward on that roadmap. So all of our training includes the on-demand training, like how do I actually analyze a business process, right? How do I put a use case together? What are the common mistakes and how do I correct them? How do I host a discovery session with stakeholders to figure out an as-is process? How do I approach improving that process? Like, right, it's all the training of how do you do those things, which is online, on demand, super flexible, and you can go through it at any time. And then as part of completing the course, we encourage you to use that in the real world, even if you aren't a business analyst today, right? You create your own case study. And if you are like, well, I don't know what process I would analyze, like that's where you can receive help from our instructors. Like we get those questions all the time, and we help people find the opportunity to apply the skills, because you are then creating that virtuous cycle of experience. Like that's why we do it this way. We get a lot of questions like, why can't you just give me a case study so I can practice it? It's because when you actually practice it in your role, that's where you get the true benefit. And so whether it's our training or someone else's, always be looking out where can I apply this in my work today so that I can start to get noticed for on-the-job opportunities. And then the layer that we provide here, so each of these courses comes with 90 days of instructor support, which means you get to email in any questions about the course materials and how to apply them in for an instructor individualized response. You'll have an instructor review your workbook. So as you go through, you create examples of everything, and they will review, give you feedback, let you know where you need to improve, what you're doing really well. And that's where like the true confidence comes from, right? Like actually having an expert in the profession give you that kind of detailed review. Then we've also just recently added small group instructor hours. So twice a month, we have our instructors we have pre-scheduled sessions where you can call in and ask questions and get feedback on any workbook issues that you have, or like I'm stuck with how to model this part of my process, right? Or any piece of the work that you're doing as part of the course, and get some feedback on. So those are our programs, and we'd love to have you join. I'd love to take questions about those as well if you have them. And then if you're looking for just more of a quick start, we do have 5 toolkits as well. And these do not come with instructor support. They don't come with the training of how to use, like how to actually do the skill, but a lot of people just like a quick start to get started, right? And so they are time saving. They do help you think through some industry standard best practices. Definitely not as in depth as the training, but the 20% savings covers those as well. Okay. So that is what I had. Wow, we were almost at the top of the hour. Yeah, but I know there's a lot of questions. So,
Right.
yeah.
Thank you so very much, Laura. Thank you so very much for the information, for the knowledge that you transferred, and bigly for the 20% discount. Thank you so very much.
Oh,
Uh,
you're welcome. Thank you for having me here. We've got great attendance too.
yeah.
Yeah.
So we can go into the question.
Yeah. I'm going to
Right.
pull the question box back off too, because sometimes it's easier. Like, feel free to lead me through, but sometimes it's like easier for my brain to actually like see it.
Oh, sure. I can totally allow you to run this if it's gonna.
Well, do you have one that you might want to start us with?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah. Okay,
Um,
great.
okay, so there is this question. I worked I worked as a business analyst in an unstructured form. In my organization, we weren't conscious of the knowledge areas in the practice of BA. Now I'm in Canada and I need to fill a lot of gaps, even though I have 10 years of experience. How do I navigate the terrain?
Yeah, that's a great question. So first of all, you don't want to discount the unstructured experience.
Mhm.
So you want to look at what you were doing and you want to map that to the skills that you're seeing in the BA job postings. And so it kind of depends on what you were doing in unstructured form. But so if you were, say, writing, often people just, well, I was just writing Word documents, right? Well, what kind of information did those Word documents have? Or what kind of information, if you were putting things into a tracking tool like Jira or something, what kind of information did that have? Was it software requirements? Was it business process details? Was it data requirements? And then it does help to do some learning to understand the structure, right? To understand the industry standard best practice around how to do those skills, so that you can say, oh, I have 10 years of experience doing this, and the confidence to really say, like, I was doing that, right? But a lot of times you really just, it's a more of an internal mental shift for you to get confident in talking about it. And so when somebody asks you, tell us about how you've done use cases, or tell us about how you've done wireframes, you are specifically speaking to those past experiences of how you've analyzed functional requirements, even if it was a quote unquote unstructured form. So you really just need to get clear on what were you doing, how does it map to the skills that you're seeing in the job postings, and being ready to share those stories and those experiences. You could even go into some of your past work, if you have it, and put it into a more structured format. So you're giving yourself that practice and that confidence. Sometimes when people go through our courses, if they're in between jobs, that's how they finish the course, is they actually go back and they do something from the past, and they redo that work in a more formal way. And it's another way to kind of get that experience level and apply the more standard practice to what you've done before. So that's my advice for you. And really thinking about, too, not just the output, but the communication. So when an employer is trying to hire a BA, they want somebody who can communicate too. They might list all the techniques that they want somebody to do, but the real differentiator is how can you help those stakeholders communicate? So being able to speak to, getting two stakeholders with different opinions on the same page about what should have been done, and then your output look like this, right? So speaking to some of those challenges that you had to overcome in that role to make sure that even what you were doing in unstructured practice was truly moving forward and creating that positive change. Okay.
Okay. I'm not sure if this question is not out of scope, but I'm still gonna read it out. So
No
someone,
worry.
aside the Babok, what other textbook would you recommend for someone trying to take the CBAP exam?
Well, the CBAP is based on the BABAC. So that is, I mean, that's a lot, right? So beyond that, I would look at an exam prep resource. So the challenge in CBAP prep is like, even if you were a good test taker in whatever schooling you had, most of us now are well past when we last took tests, and so like the test taking skill is a big part of passing the CBAP. And the questions that they ask are not, they're not simple. It's not just memorizing the BABAC. It's memorizing the BABAC, it's knowing all the knowledge in the BABAC and knowing how it fits together based on how you've applied it in your work. So there's a lot of situational questions, and so you want to have some sort of an exam prep resource. I think one of the most valuable things I found for me was to have an online exam simulator where I could take practice questions. They would tell me if I was right or wrong, and then I could improve my study. And, there's flashcards out there, there's other things, but, some sort of resource that has a tested value of, or has experience helping people actually pass the exam. You don't need like another book besides the BABAC, but you do need a resource like that.
Right. Cool. I totally agree with you.
Mm-hmm.
So someone says, can we have an example of what a business requirement looks like?
Yeah, I don't have one in the slides. Business requirement is one of those terms that's used in so many different ways. And so is this a business requirement or business requirements document? Yeah, I mean, a business requirement is like the ability to attend a webinar like we're doing here, right? So it's just that top level. There's lots of software functional requirements that go into like delivering a webinar like today. The business requirement would just be at that deliver a webinar or attend a webinar level. Yeah.
Okay. Someone also says, what's the difference between a business analyst and a business system analyst?
Yeah. I'm actually getting ready to record a video on this. So or actually we just did. I think it'll go out in a few weeks.
Great.
But and it's another, and I'm happy to share a snapshot here too, but watch for that. So it's again an area where the titles are used inconsistently, right? But when we think about the let's see, I'm going to go back to that blueprint slide for a minute. It'll be easiest. So most business analyst roles potentially do all of this at some level. Some focus mostly on the process level, especially in organizations that have both business analysts and systems analysts or business systems analysts, right? A systems analyst might focus on the software and information level and probably a level deeper. So what we talked about here was the business related elements. So what does the end user see in the software? A systems analyst often is looking at what are the APIs that are putting system or data in between these two systems. They're going to that next level of system design that requires more technical knowledge. I would say a business systems analyst is probably doing all of these things, probably at more of an end user perspective, possibly with a touch of the technical requirement as well. And then they might not do as much of the business process flow, depending on how that role is defined. So really you want to think about business analyst is going to definitely be pulled more to this business side, and systems analysts definitely pulled more to the software information side, um, and possibly that level deeper. But as a business analyst, we can definitely do all of these as well. And again, its titles are used really, really inconsistently across organizations. So.
All right. This question is a bit tricky, Laura.
Yeah.
Can we use the code on the book also? The promo.
If you buy it, I believe it will work. Yes, it will work if you buy it from our website.
Great.
So we have the Kindle print package on our website. Depending on where you're located, if you're outside the US, the way that the shipping works, it can take up to like a month to get you the print book. You get immediate access to the Kindle. And that's just, I like to be we're up front of that in the shopping cart. And, you know, I know we have a lot of international people here. If you buy it on Amazon or anywhere else books are sold, like that, we don't have the ability to give coupon codes for that. So, yeah.
Okay. Then apart from other, we have few questions around the slides. If we can.
Yeah, I'm happy to share the slides with you if you would like to share them, yeah, with the people who registered. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. We're also recording this. We'll be sharing the recording with our community. We don't mind, do you?
Awesome.
Okay. Okay. We'll look for a way to manage the exclusivity of the promo. We'll look for a way to get around that. Okay. We seem not to have additional questions here. Looks like that's all the questions that we have.
One that I saw was the difference between a project coordinator and a business analyst.
Oh, right, right.
Yeah. So often project coordinator is assisting the project manager or doing more like timesheet coordination type activities. It's actually a great, like if you are not in a professional setting now or not yet in a business, like not yet on a project, it can often be a great way to, like a great first project role that gives you exposure to how the project works and a lot of the meeting and facilitation skills that we talked about. And it's a great first like transitional role. And sometimes I think like because there's this perception in the industry that BAs are note takers or the requirements is more of a note-taking activity, right? I actually think there's a ton of power in being the note taker in a meeting, right? And it is kind of an administrative task in a way, but when you are the note taker, you are making sure you understand what everybody's saying. And you also can leverage that role to ask the questions of what's not clear. Let me make sure I get that in the notes and take that to the next level. It's not the end all be all of being a BA, but there is this way in which sometimes project coordinator roles can start to morph into business analyst roles to the extent that you are also clarifying requirements or perhaps creating requirements related documentation in that role to assist the PM. And a lot of times I think those roles morph into business analysis roles without the title in organizations that don't really understand what a business analyst does yet. So, but it really, again, project coordinator is sort of a umbrella term that's used in a lot of different ways in different organizations. Okay.
So someone saying, what was your most challenging task as a BA starting out?
Oh, that's a good one. I'd be interested to hear if anybody wants to put in the chat what they perceive the most challenging task for them is, because my reflection on this question is that it tends to be different depending on the skills that you're bringing. So when I was coming from QA to business analysis, one of the, I had I was an expert because of the way I had done testing, which was very like, it was data testing. It was behind the scenes. I understood how the technical parts of the solution were put together. I was testing the database, and it was not a SQL database. It was actually built in a custom search engine thing, right? So it was, the skill is totally unleverageable today, but conceptually I'm still leveraging it. But so anyways, I came to business analysis really understanding the technical architecture. Again, I couldn't build it, but I understood how all the pieces fit together. And on my first project, we were tackling a really complex business need that was going to stretch that architecture. And I had the quote unquote luxury of getting to work on the requirements for like a month or two before the technical team had availability to be involved. So I was very young, very junior, very experienced in the technology, learning the business analysis, but junior in terms of like, how is it going to be received if this like little 20 or 25-year-old new business analyst like comes in and says, here's the technical solution for this big major project. And what happened was like, everybody was in revolt. Like, it's never going to work that way. You can't possibly do that. Why are you making these decisions? This is the technical team's decision. So like, my most challenging task at the beginning was not bringing all that expertise to bear and to actually doing the business analysis piece, which was what's the business need? What do we actually need the system to do? And so what I had to do is kind of backtrack to that and host problem-solving sessions and ways of defining, brainstorming possible solutions and mapping out what the business wanted versus what was possible in the technology. And the irony is that after a month of that work, the architecture pretty much looked like what I had thought it would look like. But the difference between that happened in that month was that the technical team was bought in on it. And it was so important because without their buy-in on it, it was never going to get built, right? So what I had to learn was how to get buy-in on the solution and how to get that engagement and use those communication skills to get that engagement versus here's the solution, let's go build it. So I'd be interested to hear if other people had different experiences. And Bola, what do you think is the most challenging part, or what was your most challenging?
Well, for me, it will be two things. One, in terms of requirement elicitation, the stakeholders not really knowing what they really want at the beginning of the project, and secondly, changing their mind along the line of the project, and then also not having stakeholders available. Those are some of the challenges. Matter of fact, I wrote an article on BA Times, top 5 challenges in requirement management, and those are some of the things that I put in the article. The stakeholders don't know what they want or what they need. They change their mind all the time, or they are not available.
Yeah, yep, all very common ones. And we have a comment here, the most difficult task for me is eliciting comprehensive requirements from a wide range of stakeholders. People typically state what they want rather than what they need. And it is amazing how often they can change their minds. Yeah, so that's where the solution to that is understanding the business need and the business process and using the business need, like why are we doing this project, right? And always bringing it back to that. Because I think a lot of that mind changing happens when we don't have clarity on that and we're trying to, like, as we go through requirements process, like we see so many more possibilities, so many more opportunities. And so it's easy for scope to just go out of control because it's really exciting to start to think through some of the opportunities that we have. So why did we start this project? And is this still the business need we're serving? And how does this requirement serve that? Can really be a helpful way to guide that process. So, good one.
Tolu from Stratford in the US says, buying, not having clear requirements, change order requests. Those are some of the challenges that he's experienced as a business analyst.
Yep, so very similar.
Quick question for you, Laura. Nusra is a customer service representative, and she really likes to start a career in business analysis. And she's asking, what courses do you think she needs to start with to be able to? And I know this is something that you've done for tons of people. You've helped people to literally kickstart their business analysis career, grow in their business analysis career, and stabilize their business analysis career.
Yeah. Yeah, great question. So I would start either with our BA Essentials Masterclass. So that's going to give you the framework for how BAs approach a project, right? Or the business process analysis. And business process analysis is going to give you the techniques to analyze a process in your customer service area and start to jumpstart and get you on that virtuous cycle. So my gut is almost saying, as customer service representative, you're probably going to be best served here first, business process analysis, and then as you get that process going and you start to see there's a project here, then come in and do the BA Essentials Masterclass, so you have the framework for how to deliver that whole project. And you can kind of expand from there. But we usually see people start with one of these two courses who are trying to get into business analysis from the first place. A great question. And I did want to address this question from, I think it's Teslam, about the tasks not being sequential.
Right.
Do you think there's a possibility to perform strategy analysis before BA planning and monitoring? Yeah, so the tasks in the BABOK are definitely not sequential. Even the 8-step framework that we talk about, like we talk about it sequentially, but the reality is like you iterate through it and you go back and forth between those steps in some cases. As you get into the detailed requirements, you discover new needs and you have to use the tools that you learned in step 2 to go back to that. So yeah, I think, and I don't think the BABOK dictates an order. So or a depth. So you might do some planning and monitoring, right? You have to plan, that's the getting oriented, and like, what's my strategy? Who are my stakeholders? My strategy for approaching this project, right? As a BA. So you might do that little bit of planning and then go into the strategy analysis, which is that business need, the scope, solution scope piece. And then you're going to have a whole nother detailed level of planning. So don't have to think about it in a sequential way there either. Okay.
Some Taiwo also says, Alabody Taiwo says, some other challenge is conflict of interest among stakeholders in typical business analysis. Someone wants to know how to manage multiple processes for multiple projects as a BA.
Right. So I'm thinking there, that's the multiple, like you're going through the framework multiple times and you're actively trying to work on multiple projects as a business analyst. You want a clear sense of your priorities, first of all, like what is the most important. And you want to block out time during your week to work on each of them. And so having your plans for each of them can be really important. So that you know what's the next step on this one, what's the next step on that one, how does what I'm working on fit in with what everybody else is doing, with the dependencies of the project. And so that's more of a time project management piece and making sure you're allocating the right amount of time to each of those projects.
Okay. Any other, where is the place of a project manager and a business analyst during a project? What is the place? I'm not sure if you've not responded to this earlier.
We talked about the roles. So ideally, they're both working together and collaborating together, because what happens is as you're in discovery about the requirements as a BA, like you're going to come up with, somebody's going to be like, oh, that requirement, that's going to take longer than we expected. Or you come up with scope changes of some sort, right? And then you need to be sharing that information with the project manager. And similarly, the project manager, as they might be in a meeting talking about the schedule, a new need might come up and they need to be sharing that with you. And ideally, you're in most of those meetings together so that you can bring both perspectives to those decisions. But a lot of times, like, the project manager's in one meeting and you're in another, right? So having a good working relationship is really important, and also sitting down to clarify your roles and how you're going to communicate together, because there's no one, this is how it always is. And even if there was that, there'd be, you'd be the one to work with a project manager who has a different idea. So sitting down and what are our different roles? How can we support each other? How can we communicate what's for the best good of this entire project and the project team is a really good place to start in defining that.
Cool. Cool. Just feedback. Tolu is saying, thank you so much, Laura. Spot on. You've answered all my questions.
Oh, awesome. So glad to hear that.
We get a lot of people saying thank you, thank you. So thank you so very much, Laura, on behalf of myself, Taiwo, and all the guys working with us in Hubs. We say a very big thank you um, for this, and most importantly for the discount and the promo. Thank you so very much.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for having me here, and honored to be a part of it. So, and honored for what you are doing. You're making a huge contribution, and that's really amazing. So, big hats off to you.
Right. Thank you so very much once again. Thank you everyone for joining from all over Canada, USA, India, Nigeria, South Africa, Morocco, and the UK. Thank you so very much, guys, once again. Thank you, and enjoy what's left of your weekend. Thank you, and have a great day.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.